one of the young, vibrant, exciting speakers in Lubavitch, UK. So we're very excited to have Mendel on. And without any further ado, Mendel, we're going to spotlight you. And if you can unmute yourself, and over to you.
Good evening. You know you're getting old when people start introducing you as being young, because if someone's young, you know they're young. But I need to say I'm young. If you're saying they're young, then they're obviously getting old. So that's thank you. But thank you for the kind introduction. Thank you for asking me, Rabbi Pink, to join Leeds. Thankfully, Leeds United don't begin playing football till next week, and we hope Mr. Marcio does what he needs to do. He's kept us all waiting, and Mi'at Hashem, I think you can say that, B'li Neder, God willing, Misha Beirach, and all the other necessary blessings that Leeds United should be back in the Premier League. But that's only a small matter when it comes to the big issues of the day in the world that we find ourselves. And it reminds me of a story that happened when my older brother wanted to teach me how the Cohen household runs. And he said, when mum says to you, is that my mum? Maybe she's on. When your mum says to you, what did you just say? She's not asking you because she didn't hear what you just said. She's just giving you a chance to change what you said. But I say that because, partly in jest, but also in reality, that the world is asking questions and looking for new answers and looking for new solutions, for new ideas in the new reality that we find ourselves. And the irony is that people have experienced this in very different ways. People in lockdown have lost family members or have been unwell themselves. And other people have been unwell, and other people have just been bored. So unraveling this is also a journey. And perhaps we can look at some inspiration to try and get there. And please do tell me, in London, we're in our shul, we're accustomed that the rabbi just talks and talks. But thankfully, to the Zoom age, you can mute the rabbi and shut him up, boot him. So you just let me know when I've gone over the allotted time. So, but also a nice story, because stories always help us come to terms with ideas and thoughts. Rabbi Shalom Dov Ber, the Rebbe Rashab, when he was a youngster, went into his father, Reb Shmuel, and he asked him for assistance in achieving a particular goal in his divine service of self-refinement. He had a goal, which, I mean, that already goes to show that a young man has a goal of self-refinement, and he wanted some direction in how to do it. And his father, Reb Shmuel, responded. He said, the way to deal with the complexity of it is to meditate upon it with profound concentration. Think about it as much as you possibly can. And he said to his father, Reb Shalom Ber said to his father, and it's very difficult. I'm asking for more than just telling me to meditate upon it. And the answer that Reb Shmuel gave to his son is profound, because what he says is as follows. He said, when you open the Talmud and you see a discussion amongst the rabbis, the greatest sages, when they are trying to ask questions against a particular law or a particular philosophy of law, they're using great minds. But some of the conversations and the issues in the day-to-day life that they are discussing are actually not things that they would be dealing with, but it's things that the regular people in the street will have to deal with. Even in those days, less educated women or uneducated men, people that didn't know the basics perhaps of the law. And here the rabbis are using their arguments with concepts and ideas on their behalf that they would certainly not be able to come up with against the philosophy of the law. So what are they wasting their time in such senseless matters? And he answered Reb Shmuel, he said, the reason they're doing it is because when somebody is bothered about something, when someone is disturbed, then they come up with the most amazing ideas, the most creative of arguments. And even though they may not be Talmudic scholars, ultimately, if it's their goat, if it's their sheep, if it's their chicken, if it's their milk, if it's their neighbor's garden tree is of issue and disturbing them, then they're going to come up with any form of argument that the greatest sages might be able to come up with, which is then coming to the point of the day. If we're concerned about something, then we can be creative about, number one, being part of the solution rather than just part of the problem complaining. And so where do we go? Where is all this taking us? So I had to see a gentleman this evening, just before this, to ask his advice on a particular matter. Ended up that he had his own conversation that he wanted to have. Because during lockdown, he'd been reading a memoir of Simon Wiesenthal. And he was disturbed about a particular story that happened to a young woman who had given birth in the camps and the way her baby was treated. And this gentleman who I was meeting wanted to discuss his own faith as a result. But as a side note, he told me that he had read a story in there about a Jewish woman who had been got Christian papers and been living in a home for a year with a 5-year-old daughter in a 1.5 bedroom flat. And she had brought in 5 Jews into the flat with her and put them in a room in the back of the house. And she couldn't let her 5-year-old daughter know that they were there. So they were basically locked in this room of isolation for over a year. And he said, I use this story as an example to inspire my kids. He said to me, and we think we're in lockdown. What kind of lockdown? Amazon delivery comes every 5 minutes. So those that can't work are being furloughed. So there's money coming through the letterbox in the meantime. And not to undermine the predicament that people find themselves in financially, but the reality is it's been saved off to some extent. And we're actually living in some sort of a bubble, some sort of this experience where we're in lockdown, but we're very much being taken care of. And it actually represents a similar bubble that we come across in this week's Torah portion. And that bubble was the Jews in the desert. Why was it a bubble? It was a bubble because they were living in the most pleasurable way. Amazon deliveries pre-drones was coming down in the form of manna. The dry cleaning wasn't needed because you would just walk through the clouds and your clothing was pressed while it was on you. In fact, one midrash says the clouds were so aware of the needs of each of the Jews, the participants that were there in the desert, that it would give direct therapy, direct service to each person exactly what their requirements were. So it was a really magical time if you think about it. More so, they had Moses, who was the greatest teacher that ever was. So life, if you think about it, coming out of Egyptian slavery, one guy wanted to pickle cucumbers and they weren't quite as pickled the way he liked them, so he complained. Another person's delivery came a little bit spoiled because he took too much. There were a little bit of complaining that went along, but ultimately it was quite a blissful experience. And the Alter Rebbe actually suggests that the spies who are really, that we read about in this week's Torah portion, that changed the course of history, and they really have a bad report. Everybody's so negative about them, and how dare they have given a bad report? What are they giving information they weren't even asked to do? The Alter Rebbe says that actually they just love the bubble. They're like, what are we doing? We're going to go to Israel. We're going to have to work. We're going to have to get busy. This is great where we are right now. And I think actually the unraveling of the space we find ourselves in terms of lockdown is perhaps the mistake that they made, which was twofold. And as we emerge and as we rebuild or reinvigorate, if we change our mindset slightly, perhaps we will be able to liberate the world for once and for all. And their mistake was twofold. Firstly, they didn't want to leave the bubble. Why didn't they want to leave the bubble? Because they enjoyed the pleasures of spirituality and their physical needs met. That wasn't God's aspiration for creating the world. He could have done that with angels in heaven, could have kept the Garden of Eden, He didn't need to do any of, he didn't need Mesopotamia, he didn't need Egypt, he didn't need Cain and Abel, none of it, and the flood. What did he need it all for? 6 days of creation, all of the birds and the sea. What does it need it for? He could have done that with angels. He says very clearly, 6 days you get to work. You want to have Shabbos? Of course I'll give you the Shabbos and the sanctity of Shabbat. But first you got to work for 6 days. Same with Shemitah. 6 shanim, for 6 years. You got to work the land, work the field, make a living. Then on the 7th day you have your sabbatical. So their first mistake was that they wanted to be in the Sabbath mode, in the bubble of the clouds constantly, and that's not why God created the world. The second mistake, and this is perhaps more significant, is that they were unable to connect that the reality of the physical world that they were going to be going on, and the endeavors that they were going to be beginning themselves were godly. In other words, people often think that where is God? God is in shul. God is when I'm in Peter Myers buying my kosher meat. God is in Yom Kippur. God is when I'm giving tzedakah. That's godliness. But I'm going to work, when I'm sweeping the floor, when I'm taking out the rubbish, changing that, there's nothing godly about those experiences. And the real truth is that every element of what we do is meant to be infused with godliness. So, coming out of the bubble, and actually when we come out of the bubble, we're actually going to really start hitting a reality when unfortunately the economy may take a little bit of a hit. People might actually begin losing their jobs. But somewhere beneath the surface are great opportunities of people that have been re-inspired to engage in a Yiddishkeit, re-inspired to connect with Torah and mitzvot, and re-inspired to actually realize that every element of our life is the potential of divinely inspired and so controlled, so to speak. So it's time to leave the 40-day, 40-year, 40-month, whichever situation that we are in, and to start planning for a creative way of making the world that has developed so significantly over the last century, but certainly over the last 20, 30 years, in making humanity really self-sufficient in so many ways, in technologically advanced, into absolute places where we are not far away from making genetics that can make people live forever. The sort of things we read about in the coming of Mashiach times. Perhaps even taking genes and resurrection. Maybe these things aren't so far away scientifically and technologically, that because these are words that we are actually reading about, not in science fiction, but in technological advancement, we're at a place where the world is really ready for a new story, for a new chapter in the story, and the liberation of all of humankind from this tragedy will be the personal one as well. And some people have found it difficult to call it a personal experience, because when other people are suffering, or when it's such a worldwide event,